about there's some protests against the Bouchard Commission that happened in November 2007, and outside of hearings, police brutalized protesters after they were leaving. This protest was organized by Refusing Intolerance in Quebec. It was a coalition of activist community members, broad spectrum of different groups, protesting racism and political manipulation of different parties around the so-called reasonable accommodation debate. So originally we had entered the Palais de Congrès, and we didn't really have a plan of going upstairs to where the hearings were held. But after securing our space downstairs with the acceptance of security, we then managed to make our way upstairs in front of the doors of where the hearings were happening. There's about, I would say, 70 protesters, and there's a lot of similarities to what everyone was talking about at what happened at Women's Day earlier that year. It was very lively, festive. There was children and a very diverse group of people. And eventually, some police officers came upstairs and requested us to leave. Of course, at first we refused, and there was a bit of a scuffle, and in the end, we decided to follow the directives of police and proceeded to go downstairs. And when we went downstairs, there was about 25 police officers, and some of them had gear. They weren't in full riot gear, but had some kind of protection. And I was actually the one with the children, and I was kind of straggling because I was trying to put my son in his car seat. And as I was doing this, his car seat was being pushed, and I looked up and there was a police officer who seemed very surprised to see me with the child. And at that point, he told me to leave from another entrance, and I refused. And then again, he insisted to go from another entrance. And at that point, I got really worried, because I had another son that was there who had already started his way out. Like at that point, I kind of panicked because I didn't know where he was, and I just by what the officer told me, I was imagining something was going to happen. And sure enough, as everyone was leaving, it was kind of anticlimactic, I guess. And as I was in the doorway anyways, that's when the police started pushing, punching, using batons on people, and some officers had drawn their tasers. So it was like unprovoked. I mean, there's nothing that would have led to anyone imagining that something like this would happen, because there was actually no police presence for most of the protests, which happened upstairs, and it's like they just came at the ending. And I guess what makes this even more strange is, like the police always use the image of like a protester as like violent or antisocial, and just like at the Women's Day March, even by like mainstream standards or police standards, the police violently pushed an elderly man of the community onto the ground. So just kind of shows how whatever standards you use, their behavior was disgusting and brutal. At the end of the protest, they had made 4 arrests. One person was released immediately, and then they just used like random ticketing infractions. Like I don't really remember, but maybe being loud in a public place or something. That's another tactic the police use when people are behaving, I guess, in a manner that is unacceptable to the state. And And then one person was charged with assault, which was not the case, and he actually was Christophe, and he had his hearing earlier. I think it was like the end, maybe it was in November, almost 2 years later, and was acquitted. The police officer didn't show, so that's also a common tactic that the police use, saying that you were assaulting them when clearly, I mean, everyone was there and there was no weapon. So that was one of the charges. So this is, a clear example of political repression against people fighting for social justice. And what kind of makes this a little ironic is the hearings were like, it was targeted at racialized communities in Quebec, and the government was asking communities to justify their existence on the inside and on the outside. They were using violence to silence them, and that also shows like the inherent violence that was surrounding the whole debate. And I'm going to use a little anecdote of some of the lessons, I guess, that can be taken from this. It was actually maybe 2 months ago, we were driving down Boucher, and my son actually pointed out the Palais du Congrès and was like, oh, that's the place where the police were. And I was pretty surprised that he still remembered it, and we drive by there fairly regularly. And I said, yes, that's right. And he asked me, why were the police there? And I told him because some people didn't want us to be there. And he asked a whole bunch of questions and was trying to figure out how to explain to him what reasonable accommodation was and why people would have such a thing. But in the ending of this conversation, he was like, okay, so when people don't like what you're saying, they just use the police to get rid of you. And I mean, from the mouth of he's 5, and it just shows that, like in plain language, that's what happens. If, the government doesn't want you there, they don't like what you're saying, they want you to keep quiet, they just send the police, and the police do what they're told. And then at the ending of this also, it was kind of like, it was 2 days of protest, so then we went to the next day, and then we just ended up staying outside, and there was heavy police presence, but we didn't even bother to try to go inside. And then a few months after, they published their report of or what the Liberal Party had to say, their recommendations, and some of our groups had gone to give our voice and say how we rejected all their findings. And there was just 5 or 6 of us, and including my children, so maybe 4 adults, and they had a whole bunch of police officers even before we got there, and they wouldn't even let us upstairs. And during this, the security just kept on telling us, to just leave, and then he could get the police to leave, and then was kind of using he had said something like, you people use your kids and use, you're just making reference to the fact, kind of that we didn't belong there, and that we're not protesters, and just trying to say that we just did that to make the police look bad, basically, because, all protesters are dangerous, and how irresponsible to put yourself there and let yourself be used.
Juste avant que Alex prenne la parole, je vous annonce que l'atelier donné par COPP pour connaissez vos droits, ça va être à 14h maintenant. Alors, je t'y annonce. Donc, Alex.
Bonjour. Je vais parler du phénomène des arrestations de masse de manifestants à Montréal, mais je vais plus particulièrement insister sur le travail de soutien judiciaire s'occuper des faits pendant les procédures judiciaires contre les manifestants qui ont été arrêtés. Premièrement, je tiens à préciser que j'ai moi-même été arrêté dans plusieurs arrestations de masse. J'ai été aussi impliqué dans le soutien de plusieurs procès. À Montréal, on est devenu la capitale des arrestations de masse de manifestants vers la deuxième moitié des années 90. Et c'est pas mêlant, aussitôt qu'il y avait un groupe radical, un groupe qui avait un discours radical qui organisait une manifestation, il y avait la police anti-émeute qui se tenait à proximité et qui attendait une excuse pour intervenir, encercler tout le monde, porter des accusations criminelles. On a vu le 1er mai en 2008, moi, ce qu'on a vécu dans ces années-là, c'était qu'il ne laissait pas partir les gens. Il les encerclait, et là, il y avait un long processus qui se mettait en marche, où ce que les policiers faisaient sortir les manifestants arrêtés un par un du cercle, et après ça, prenaient en photo, mettaient dans le panier à salade. Une fois que le panier à salade était plein, envoyaient les gens dans un centre de détention, centre opérationnel sud sur l'Air-Vie, etc., etc. Et les gens passaient la nuit en détention. La plupart du temps étaient libérés le lendemain sous une promesse de comparaître. L'accusation commune à tous les manifestants dans ce temps-là, c'était acquittement illégal. Parfois, il y avait des accusations supplémentaires, dépendamment de l'inspiration de l'enquêteur, doubler la paix, les faits, etc. Mais acquittement illégal, c'était systématique. J'ai été très impliqué dans 3 cas d'arrestation de masse en particulier. Dans le suivi, l'arrestation de masse du 15 mars 2000, 112 arrestations, des accusations de participation à une émeute en plus de l'accusation d'acquittement illégal ainsi que des accusations de méfaits. Le 1er mai 2000, on parlait du 1er mai, manifestation anarchiste à Westmount, dans le secteur très très truqué de Westmount. D'ailleurs, ça s'appelle Summit Circle. Okay. Arrestation de masse, 146 arrestations. D'ailleurs, on ne l'a pas vu venir du tout, celle-là. En fait, la plupart du temps, on ne la voit pas venir, mais en tout cas, cette fois-là, c'était vraiment une manifestation, je veux dire, on était très, très, très tranquille et bon. Et arrestation de masse du 15 mars 2002. Journée internationale contre la brutalité policière. Cette fois-là, les policiers ont eu, il y a eu une vitre cassée au quartier général de la police au 1441 Saint-Urbain. Et ce fut le prétexte pour procéder à une arrestation de masse, mais cette fois-là, les policiers se sont gâtés et ont fait la plus importante rafle policière depuis la crise d'octobre en 1970. Ils ont procédé à l'arrestation de 371 personnes. Là-dessus, il y avait 103 mineurs. Maintenant, les arrestations de masse, ça fait des gros titres dans les journaux.